Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Craig Titus and this is our first video, first weekly video for English 201 Masterpieces of World Literature, which is the first half chronologically of a two-part series. Sort of all of world literature is divided into two pieces. This is the first half. We begin with ancient literature and we'll go up to about medieval. If we have time, this is optimistic, but if we have time, maybe we'll make it as far as Shakespeare, which is Renaissance. I don't know if we have that much time. This video, I want to tell you a little bit about the class, tell you a little bit about myself so you know sort of what to expect for the class and for me and for assignments and so on. This is going to be great. I love these classes. I've taught this class a number of times before in other similar classes, so I can tell you with confidence that I really think you're going to like this. All right, let me give you an overview. I wasn't sure what to tell you first. Let me give you just an overview of how the class is going to work, and then we'll talk a little bit about the syllabus and your first assignments, and then we'll be done for the week. So the class is divided into basically three pieces, kind of like 2.5 pieces really. But the first part, and by the way, I'm looking at our syllabus here, right? Exactly the same thing that you have online. I'll talk more about this in a minute. The first part of the class is an introduction to the study of literature. I want to talk a little bit about why we study literature. It tends to be scoffed at sometimes by people who don't get it, who don't understand why we do such things. And most people, I think, who really engage in the study of literature, they understand why, and they feel the value of doing this, and they know within themselves that this is a really important thing to do and that they get a lot out of it. But it's really hard to explain what that is, right? Especially when people take a very technical approach and they say, what job skills do you learn reading Beowulf? It's hard to explain, but there is a very good answer. And so we will talk about that in the first like the first week or 2 weeks maybe. And then we'll have a little reading quiz on that, something pretty minor, something you'll kind of get used to each week as we go along. The second major part, and this is like most of the first half of the semester, we're going to do ancient literature. Ancient lit is funny because to most people it sounds really distant and far away. And it is, of course. Right? We start with ancient Egyptians. It's 3,000 years BC. Not just 3,000 years ago, 3,000 BC. It's an unbelievably long time ago. The differences between our world and theirs are unfathomable. Quite literally, it's impossible to understand how different their world was from ours. But when we read their writings, in translation, of course, in English, we see that these people really aren't so different from us. They worried about the same things. They had the same questions about life and death and the afterlife and how to treat people and the importance of families and things like this. And one of the reasons that literature is so cool is that it gives us this window into this world that we could not have any other way. The historian, for example, could tell us about ancient Egypt. And we can learn a lot about it, but we don't get to see inside of it. We don't get to hear the voices. We don't get to see what people were really thinking in their own words unless we study the literature. And that's true for so much of this stuff. And so it's, for that reason, really cool. So we'll have an exam on this at about the middle point of the semester. Spring break divides the spring semester nicely. Spring break is week 9. So we will have essentially our midterm. It's just kind of our first exam right before spring break in week 8. The second half after the break, we're going to do medieval literature. And this too is like super cool. Medieval literature, like ancient, spans a wide range of countries, times, cultures, languages, all kinds of things. So you get this huge range of writings, all fit within medieval, period. And can they be bound together by ideas? Maybe. We'll see. So we'll read all of this stuff, obviously in translation. Hardly any of it was written in English, and so it's translated into modern English for us, which is quite nice. And we'll read some classics. There's a reading list available for you on Blackboard, so you'll see. That reading list, I think, is what we'll end up doing. We could always go less, almost certainly not more. So then we'll have a second exam at the end of the semester on medieval lit. That's it. Otherwise, the only other grade that you're going to have to worry about is the weekly grade, I was going to say. In the past, I've done weekly reading quizzes. We might do some of that stuff, but we're going to do some other things this time, like a sort of simpler responding to questions about the literature. So, for example, I'm sometimes interested that you understand the story and the basic, who the characters are and what's going on. And I think that's important. But for a college level class on literature, you also need to understand the social issues, the big, sort of more philosophical questions that these works of literature raise for us. And so I want you to be able to think about this stuff, to analyze it, to have your own thoughts on it, and so on. So what I'll do is I'll pose some questions for you, not quiz questions per se, but like response questions. And I'll grade these to the extent, and like I'll say they're good to the extent that they show that you read the work and that you mostly understand it. You don't have to be perfect, of course, but I want to see you trying to understand it and mostly understanding it. Those will be the good responses. And the people who indicate they really haven't read, they're just kind of trying to answer the questions, those won't do as well, obviously. So that's it. We'll do the weekly questions and or quiz. And then we'll do a midterm and a final exam, basically, and that is your total for points in your grades. Okay. For this week, I want you to read the syllabus. There's a little assignment in there if you haven't seen it already. Some of you have. But I want you to read it, see what I'm asking you to do in here. There's something very easy, very simple to do. But I want you to read this just because it has our policies, like our late assignment policy and our absent policy and email etiquette, and it's sort of basics, but I want you to know all of these things, and of course I do want you to follow them and so on. So take a look. Okay. For this week, here's your homework assignment. I will usually deliver it this way, somewhere in the end of the video, because I want you to watch these videos. Because I found out in the past that if I just write the homework assignment and put it on Blackboard, people don't always watch the videos. And then they don't do well because they don't get the lecture and the explanations and stuff that you can get in the video. So probably most weeks I'll give you your homework assignment like this, verbally. Okay. We're going to do a thing called coffin texts this week. It's very simple. It's very introductory. You don't need to know really much about these. Certainly you don't have to have any expertise on this, but I just want you to see them and have some experience, and we're going to talk about it some more next week. But so I will upload the sample of these texts, and the basics of this is that in ancient Egypt, some of the very first writings ever, and certainly the oldest writings that have survived to us, so the oldest ones that we have access to now, are these. And they are writings and drawings and sometimes symbolic writing. So, things that you might think of as like hieroglyphics. They're not hieroglyphs, but they're kind of like that in a way. And there are various languages which are long gone by now. People would write inside of people's coffins when they have died, and the bodies are in the coffins, they're about to go into the ground. People will write messages in there, and the messages were almost always like instructions to the dead for how to navigate the underworld, which is what they called it, because they believed that they had to navigate this underworld in order to get to their final resting place, which, depending on when you're looking at, what culture this was, what century, it might have been Elysium, or it might have been some version of heaven or things like that. It varied, but it's that kind of idea, where it's sort of an eternal, happy resting place. There was always a journey to get there. You had to talk to different people who are dead. You had to say the right things and so on. And so that's what these were. Sometimes there were spells, like magic, basically, that served the same purpose. They helped the dead navigate the underworld, so they would not get duped, like tricked by any of the characters that they would meet down there. And that's what this writing was. And it's interesting because if you think about it, it might seem kind of weird to us. Maybe we don't believe any of these things that caused them to write it. But what really caused them to write these things was care for their family, a concern for their dead family members and friends. It's they're trying to be helpful. They're trying to understand what happens after death. They're wrestling with these thoughts about what happens when you die and how we deal with it as the living. And I think you'll find that we do a lot of the same things now. We put things inside coffins, not for the same reason necessarily, but the rituals are pretty similar. We offer blessings and prayers, depending on what religion or faith or spiritual background you might be a member of. You have different ways of approaching these rituals when people pass away. We have things like headstones, right, and cemeteries and memoriams and shrines of sorts, and things we put up in order to honor the dead. And a lot of this stuff is motivated by the same thing. So have this in mind, maybe as you read these things, and maybe you can ask yourselves whether you think I'm right about this, that the ancient Egyptians maybe really weren't so different, even though their world and their time and their language were all very different. So we'll see what you think. I do have a homework assignment for you this week, and that is to do some of these response questions that I told you about. They're going to be straightforward this week. I just want you to thinking about these things. I want you to do just a little bit of writing. I usually expect about a half of a page typed double-spaced, 12-point font. It's not much. It's about 150 words. In other words, if you do it in a different format, go by word count, about 150 words. I'm not grading you on word count, but if you turn in like 25 words or something, you haven't really thought about it all that much. And on the other hand, you don't need to write 5 pages. It's sort of more than we're looking for. But so that's really it. It should be otherwise self-explanatory. And if you have questions about the details of the assignments or the readings or anything else, please let me know. And we will. I'll do my best to answer whatever questions, issues you might have. So that's it. You can reach me by email, by telephone, or you can come here to the office. All of this information is on the syllabus. It's also listed in Blackboard, and should be easy to find, and you can do this at any time, and I really encourage you to do so. I'm a real person. I'm alive. I'm here. I'm in Valdez. I want you to ask me whatever questions you have, and so I'd love to get to know you all personally, but I know we're at a distance, so we'll do what we can. Okay. That's it for now. I'll see you next week in week 2 when we dive into all this stuff in more detail. So welcome to class, and we'll see you next week.